When people hear the word cult, they think religion, but not all cults are religious. Some are built on ideas, politics, identity, and movements. And when those ideas become unquestionable, belief can turn into control. Questions are considered a compromise to the system.
You're a 1 or a 0, alive or dead.
Hello everyone, my name is Flario. Welcome to the channel, or welcome back to the channel. So today's video, we are going to be getting into secular cults. This is a secular cult type. It is a classification of cult, and it is to do with politics pretty much. As we all know, everything in life is a belief structure, including politics itself. And therefore, politics often does create sort of a cult-like following. So it is a type of cult, and we are going to be discussing it. In any other kind of era, this probably wouldn't be such a iffy kind of video. And I debated not releasing this just because we're in like this weird place right now in the world where politics is becoming very extreme on both sides and everyone's just like fighting with each other. So like, I don't want us all to be fighting in the comments here. I'm not creating this video to argue or fight. I'm just creating it because I think it's disingenuous for me to leave out one cult type and talk about all the others. So we're going to dive into secular cults today. At the end of this video, I do want to discuss, if you guys may or may not have noticed, I have been linking fundraisers to stuff on my videos. I will also discuss that at the end of this video because it's a bit of a long spiel that I want to go into about that. So if you want to stick around, listen to that at the end as well. I'm not going to put it in the beginning here, but let's hop into this video on secular cults. Secular ideology, aka a political cult. In this cult, it starts with a charismatic leader, but it's the ideology that continues after they're gone. These secular cults often are political related. So it's not spiritual or things like that. It's often centered on a political or social dogma. The core feature of this type of cult is a movement or organization becomes a total moral universe. There's usually a center of gravity, a leader. It may have been charismatic at the time, they might be gone, whatever, or it might be an institution. Additionally, secular cults can fall under self-help groups and things like that. It does have that sort of ability. The idea of the secular cult is it's a cult kind of based around a charismatic leader or ideology or philosophy, and there's no supernatural beliefs in it at all. Like that's the idea of it. Most often this ends up being more political cult, but there are some self-help groups as well. Some people have also compared maybe Nexum, that's an NXIVM, that cult, to a secular cult as well. And there are like MLMs as well that could fit in here, but I am going to be doing a whole video on MLMs and business cults, so we're not going to talk about that. But some people do say that any sort of atheist movement falls under secular cult as well. I can see the argument for it. I can see the argument against it, but maybe we can take a look at a small little case study on that. So it's just something to keep in mind that these secular cults are really, it's like a cult that's based on no religion whatsoever, usually charismatic leader. Most often it ends up being political cult, but sometimes it can be like a self-help group kind of deal. And a lot of times these people are usually atheists as well. It has a similar church structure to it, just without any gods or spirituality. It's not truly leaderless. There are recognized authorities, gatekeepers, and approved narratives. All right, what ideology does a secular cult usually start with? Most of these type of movements start with something genuinely human, often good. They play on people wanting meaning, people wanting moral clarity. They want to feel like their life connects to something bigger than themselves. These are larger movements. Having community and belonging is really important. There'll also be a shared language for suffering or injustice, direction in a confusing world, a sense of purpose and agency.
From protesting the established order to furthering new ideas, youth are often on the front lines of political and social transformations, hoping to make the world a better place.
In a healthy movement, healthy secular movement, the ideas stay useful. You can question them, refine them, update them, test them against reality. And disagreement doesn't make you evil. It just means that you're critical thinking. The danger starts when this movement becomes a sacred identity. A secular ideology becomes cult-like when loyalty replaces curiosity, and the worldview becomes non-negotiable. And so let's talk about techniques. How does a movement like this become a whole moral universe? So like I said, it usually begins with this belonging, usually belonging plus certainty plus moral purpose. It'll feel like a relief for a lot of people, especially people that are feeling overwhelmed, searching for direction, craving an explanation for why the world feels broken. The movement provides a storyline. There's a truth, there's an enemy, there's a mission, there's a correct side of history. And then people get like an emotional payoff with it all. They feel like they're no longer drifting or they're part of something really important. And that is okay at first, but then the shift happens where it's no longer just an ideology and now we're shifting into a cult. This is when the movement stops being a way to engage with ideas and instead it becomes about testing loyalty to the ideology. When an ideology like this goes cultic, this is usually what shows up. Number one, we have moral absolutism. Everything becomes clean and binary. There's good or bad, pure or corrupt, awake or asleep. There's no gray area. Nuance is weakness. Questions are considered a compromise to the system.
You're a 1 or a 0. Alive or dead.
Number two, enemy narratives. The group needs an outside to define the inside, so it builds a villain, a corrupt system, an evil cabal, a hidden enemy. It isn't always political, but most time you'll find it is political in these types of cults. You'll see it in wellness spaces a lot though too, like big pharma, mainstream therapists. It locks identity through threat. Number three, dissent is framed as betrayal. With cults in general, debate dies at this point. Disagreement isn't a contribution, it's disloyalty. Once dissent becomes betrayal, the self-correction becomes impossible. And number four, it's like a closed sort of loop or environment. System decides in advance what counts as real. They decide what's approved sources, what sources are trusted. Outside sources from this are propaganda. Criticism is interpreted as proof that the critics are compromised. That's how this becomes a self-sealing closed loop, essentially. Number five, loyalty as reality. Over time, people stop asking, is this accurate? Instead, they just look at, does this help our side? Does this sell our narrative? Reality becomes less important than cohesion. So it's more about protecting the worldview versus like protecting an actual person that represents it. And the consequence of all this? Well, the consequences, it's not just intense belief, it's the death of correction as a whole. Once a movement becomes a moral universe like this, then facts, negotiable now, they're not facts. Accountability is optional. Opponents become subhuman. Leaving becomes shameful and socially costly, and the group's identity becomes more important than the outcomes. The movement stops being a tool for understanding reality, and it becomes a system for policing loyalty. Let's delve into a case study about this. I'm going to choose a couple more cases with this one, just kind of build it out more so we can look at this as a whole. Also because there's a very interesting case I did not realize, and it was in the 1970s called the Democratic Workers' Party. And this is the lady who I keep showing clips, and she does interviews about cults and escaping cults, and she shows up on everyone's videos, and I did not realize, but she was in this cult. So I do want to cover this just because I have showed clips of her before. I see her all over the place speaking on this. She's very much like a subject matter expert. So I do want to discuss the cult that she escaped. And then we're going to talk about the Larouche movement, which is also a political cult. And then what I want to do is just touch on briefly, there is a cult of reason. This is like not necessarily political. This was an atheist cult in France. So I just kind of want to touch on that a little bit to look at a cult that wasn't really about politics, was more about atheism. Because some people believe that secular cults is more a definition for atheists versus like political, but it tends to be more political more often, but I can see the argument with the atheism. So we're going to just touch on that as well. So I'm going to be doing like a voiceover extra recordings of these other cults, but I did do an on camera with the Larouche movement. So we'll cover that first. I don't know this case. I don't know this very well at all. I just sort of read through it briefly, but it's called the Larouche movement. essentially the definition of this particular cult is because of this particular movement. Essentially, they're like, this is the grandfather of secular cults or something like that. So that's why I was like, okay, let's discuss this case, even though I don't know a ton about it. So I'm just going to give you a summary that I kind of pulled off of some initial high-level research. The Larouche movement refers to the political organization and surrounding network built around Lyndon Larouche and his followers that spanned over decades. Larouche is a pioneer of conspiracy theories. Larouche's political following bordered on a cult, and he ran for president 8 times, in between which he served prison time on federal mail fraud charges.
Mondale is not simply a KGB agent in the ordinary sense, of course. Mondale is jointly owned by the left wing of the Socialist International and the grain cartel interests.
Larouche soon became the definition of a lunatic fringe of American politics.
Bush, a former member of the Satanic Trilateral Commission.
Like I said, it's often discussed in cult-like political movement terms because it was not just controversial, but because critics and former members described it as a closed belief system where reality is filtered through loyalty to the movement's narrative, and dissent is treated as betrayal. So even though there was a leader that started it all, it was the ideas that survived and grew, not really him. Additionally, what I've seen in some of my late research here too is that there's still people that are following this movement. This movement is still alive in different countries across the world. The picture up on the screen here shows Larouche supporters in Stockholm protesting against the Treaty of Lisbon, and that was from 2007 to 2009. And this picture here is Larouche supporters in Chicago in 2007. And this is a group of Larouche supporters in Alaska, May 2012. So the setup of this, the good idea at the beginning, was a promise of being part of a serious world historic project.
In 1968, 46-year-old Lyndon Larouche took charge of a group of young students who wanted to change the world. And drawn from Lenin's What Is to Be Done, he came to believe that he should be at the head of the professional revolutionaries that would guide the less advanced masses. Borrowing from Gramsci's idea of hegemony, he saw himself in competition with other intellectuals on the left for leadership.
Saving society, fixing institutions, exposing hidden corruption, and restoring truth. That pitch lands hard, especially with people who feel disillusioned with the world, alienated from mainstream institutions. It offers certainty, purpose, and a role that you're not just a supporter, you're a participant in something big, something consequential. Eventually, Larouche ended up moving more right extremists and conspiracy theorists, and at that point, his ideology started getting very muddied. Nobody really knows exactly what Larouche believed, but it seemed to be linked to some conspiracy theory of the British Crown and that the Queen was trying to take out America. So techniques of how they kind of made this happen. He began his movement with a 7-hour meeting with his disciples at Columbia University. He believed that the next generation of revolutionary people were here.
And with what he saw as the looming crisis of capitalist collapse, he figured that only he and his followers could prevent the coming catastrophe. His party grew to 1,000 members.
This was, again, like the closed loop thing. The movement positioned itself as uniquely able to interpret world events, and outside sources became suspect by default. Enemy narratives, it was a constant they, media, institutions, shadow networks. It was used to explain any setbacks, and it was used to unify the group as well, shared enemy. They also did high-intensity commitment culture. This was recruitment, training, and activism. It became a lifestyle to these people. There was special language that they used within the organization, and identity was increasingly routed through the movement. And then social enforcement. This agreement, it wasn't handled as normal debate. It tended to be framed as weakness, corruption, or disloyalty, creating pressure to conform or be kicked out, essentially. Additionally, Larouche would hold these ego-stripping sessions where essentially they tear you down to build you back up. Like all these cults kind of do this. You gather together, you talk about your insecurities, and they use them against you. And with Larouche's movement specifically, he got all the other members to attack said person who was on the spotlight during these sessions. Then there was narrative patching. So it was like doomsday cult patching. When the predictions or claims failed, then the story was adapted rather than collapsed. often by reframing failure as sabotage, misunderstanding, or a deeper layer outsiders can't see or understand. The catalyst in these a lot is external scrutiny.
By 1973, Larouche pushed his group from the far left to the far right, embracing anti-Semitism and inspirations from Mussolini and Hitler, propagating conspiracy theories, and ordering violence against his opponents on the left.
Investigations, press coverage, public criticism, legal trouble, etc. all led to pressure on this organization. This proves that we're over the target. This proves that we are on the right path because we're currently being persecuted in the media. And this persecution framing can deepen loyalty because defending the movement becomes part of defending your identity and your morals. And the consequences of all this isn't just strong opinions, it's total distortion of reality through loyalty.
He tried to control every aspect of his followers' lives, from where they lived, to when to quit their jobs, to what they should read. Larouche even taught them how to squeeze money from their parents for his cause, and when to break up with their partners.
His legacy lives on in the generation of semi-messianic conspiracy theorists who seem to have fashioned themselves in his image.
Hey, if we could just get the Green Movement and the unions and the social justice people together, we could control the world.
But it was Larouche who proved that if you're emphatic enough, often enough, someone will start to believe you.
So the Larouche movement worked as a structural example of secular ideology cult because the control isn't primarily religious. It was more like social and political motivated. It was about they kind of created a sealed moral universe where loyalty filters reality and criticism gets treated as betrayal. I'm just going to open with an introduction to Yanya, who is part of this Democratic Workers' Party cult.
So my name is Yanya Larouche, and I'm a retired professor of sociology at one of the California state universities. And I've been studying and writing about cults for about 35 years now. And I got into this because I myself was in a cult. When I was 30 years old, I had just moved to San Francisco after living on an island off the coast of Spain for 4 years. And don't ask me why I left. But anyway, so I was kind of new in town and I got recruited, and I've always been socially progressive. Anyway, I got recruited into a left-wing political cult. And I was in that group for about 10 years, and it was very restrictive and harsh. And when I got out, I, moved to New York and to get away from San Francisco, and got some therapy and started doing a lot of research and writing because that's kind of just always been my orientation. And then after about 10 years, went to grad school, got my PhD, and sort of I wouldn't say it totally dominates my life, but I'd say at least one of my biggest life missions has been to help survivors and also to educate the public about cults.
At the time when the Democratic Workers' Party was getting started, this was the time, like the 60s, 70s. I mean, this was founded in 1974, but we know the 60s, 70s, very much about protests, women's rights, just a lot of things were changing. Women even just getting equal pay, being able to get equal chance at a job, things like that.
Of course, it's equal rights to have a job, to have respect, not be viewed as a piece of meat, to get into schools, to training programs. We're the bottom third of the employment in terms of pay. We represent, nonetheless, 34% of the workforce, yet we're the first to be laid off and the last to be hired. They aren't frivolous demands at all. We just want what men have had all these years.
This was a perfect time for actually a lot of cults showed up during this time. And honestly, it was because this was sort of a exploration, letting go of societal norms and everything during this time. We could go through a list. There's a huge amount of cults there. But anyway, it was started by Marlene Dixon, and she was a professor at the University of Chicago. And then she also worked at McGill University, which is in Montreal as well. She initially got a lot of popularity among the students when it was in 1968. She did a political demonstration with the students where there was a bunch of professors doing a ceremony of sorts, and she ended up locking herself in a place with students, I think 100 students, for a short amount of time. It was like an on-campus protest. Then they initially were trying to, I guess, fire her, and they punished the students, and then everyone made a big deal. Then they ended up offering her a contract back again. Then she turned it down.
On November 13th, 1968, sociology professor Marlene Dixon went too far. Chicago Maroon reports that during a faculty procession at the inauguration of Edward Levi, the university's 8th president, instead of joining her fellow staff members, Marlene Dixon protested alongside 100 students, chanting, "Work, study, get ahead, kill." A fair response to the draft requirements during the Vietnam War. 2 months later, when the sociology department unanimously declined to renew Dixon's appointment for a second term, some students recalled Marlene's earlier show of solidarity. In early January, students banded together as a committee of 75 and sent an open letter to the Maroon, demanding that Dixon be rehired and that students be given an equal say in decisions to hire and fire professionals. The sit-in protest they carried out began on January 30th, 1969, and ended on February 14th, in 1969.
She was like a catalyst for other issues. Like students were upset that the school wasn't opposing the Vietnam War, that it wasn't supporting women. It had like barely any female professors, things like that. So it kind of just was a causation for a lot of other issues that came up. And then there was a lot of protests and everything going on at the time. So with all this, she built up a following of students, and this gave her an initial group for her cult. So in 1974, at this point, she ended up in San Francisco in California. She ended up creating her group and had essentially like Leninist guidelines.
After her dismissal, Dixon went on to found the Democratic Workers' Party, DWP, which became known for its radical Marxist and feminist positions. Despite the challenges she faced, her work continued to influence leftist thought and activism.
Which is essentially like the Marxist communism. It's really a philosophy around social equality and socialism and things like that. But whenever this stuff gets put into practice, any political theory, whenever it gets put into practice, it always ends up going bad. Like no political theory actually remains the specific theory that it is. But it is attractive to look at some of these theories and say, yes, we should be all helping each other. We should be, all equal, one with each other, which was the idea behind actually the Marxist communism. So anyway, she ended up creating this group, and she had about 100 to 125 people as her core group. And as it went on, they started growing bigger and bigger. They participated in many leftist activities, did different strikes, protests, things of that nature. So very much it was a very focused around like women's rights kind of group. Eventually it started to turn into a cult. Dixon was being held up on a pedestal, so kind of like a personality cult, and it became like a political cult as well in theory of it all. And she was sort of held up on a pedestal as like a figure, a higher up figure. They ended up actually starting their own print shop, which then helped them print different books, flyers, so forth, that helped spread the news and their goals and everything, and get the word out about socialism and equal rights and different things like that. So there are some books and such that are released as well.
Publishing the Journal of Contemporary Marxism and having members speak at leftist academic events in the US.
But as the 1970s were drawing to a close, Dixon had concerns that her party was becoming too reformist and that they weren't being revolutionary like they once were. As well, Dixon actually started moving away from the Marxist-Leninism, and she declared that it was a failure in the United States. Yeah, I mean, political theories are kind of a mess. They don't really seem to work out, honestly. The way that we would think that they would doesn't happen in practice. So she was trying to get rid of the party's communist image and just sort of replace it with a democratic centralism kind of image, socialism, but not like a centrist kind of idea. And in 1985, Dixon was trying to set up a think tank in Washington, D.C. However, at this point, what's been going on the whole time is Dixon's behavior and other stuff going on within the party that was very cult-like, and it was reaching its boiling point.
Initially, I thought I had really found something. I thought I finally had a group of people that would give me purpose and meaning, and it was just the most wonderful feeling in the world, although I was, even from the beginning, sort of cautious and skeptical and wondering, well, really, what is this? But as time went on, the group became more and more restrictive and more controlling of my daily life. And I would say, when I think about it, I mean, the thinking back now from that group, I think the main thought that comes to mind is anxiety, confusion, and fear. Those were the main feelings that I had during most of those years.
Party members were upset with Dixon's behavior. They said that she had alcoholism that was causing a lot of issues. She was paranoid. She was being erratic. You couldn't talk to her properly as well. She was also doing these quality of life campaigns within the party and trying to get other members to assess their lives. Specifically, she was getting her lieutenants to actually assess people. And this is where things kind of started falling apart.
For a lot of that time was in leadership positions and had to carry out acts that now I find reprehensible, and it was a very, very stressful time. You know, one of the ways I think it's important for people who leave these groups is to really look back and evaluate what they did and why they did it, and how people got to do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. Our group was very abusive in the sense of having constant criticism sessions where we sat in a circle and somebody got blasted, and I was one of the most harsh of the enforcers of that regime. I also expelled many people. I separated couples. I convinced people not to have babies. I convinced people not to go home for their parents' funerals, not to get married to a particular person. I stood guard over people who were under house arrest for weeks at a time. I was part of a special elite team called the Eagles, who served as a bodyguard for the leader and who were often sent out to intimidate other groups or former members of our own group. So those were the kinds of things we did, which weren't very pleasant.
Dixon also had been traveling a lot too, so she kind of lost her hold on it, and the lieutenant started realizing like a lot of the issues, and people started getting disillusioned with it, and then eventually the party did disband.
In terms of leaving groups, I actually did think about leaving my group. I was a true believer as much as Steve was, and yet there were times, especially as the years went on, 10 years is a long time to work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, year after year. You're absolutely exhausted. I mean, the fatigue is something that really wears you down and hinders your ability to think. But when I would think about leaving, because I would look around me and I would think, God, what is happening to everybody? You know, people who were brilliant people, doctors, lawyers, professors, I mean, those are the kinds of people who were in my group, were just becoming shriveled human beings, and I would think, something isn't right here. I would have that thought for a fleeting second, and then immediately you push the thought back, because what happens in these groups is that over time you lose your complete sense of self, and you adopt what Steve was referring to, this sort of cult personality. But the real person is still there, so there's this battle that's going on. And at times I truly felt like a schizophrenic. I felt that while I was in the group. And yet, because you're in the context of the group, you're continually choosing for the cult personality because that's the environment you're in. So the other person is sort of continually squelched. So that you get to the point where, the way I describe it now, I wouldn't have thought about it at the time, but I mean, I felt truly psychologically trapped. I mean, I would see the door and I would believe that I could not walk out that door. I don't know what I thought, but the fear is so enormous, and it's not, we weren't a mystical group. We didn't have, you know, a religious worldview. We had a political worldview. We certainly had enemies. We had fabricated enemies. We believed the FBI was going to come and torture us. You know, these were all techniques used to keep us controlled and fearful and paranoid, and to intensify the us versus them mentality. So when I thought about going out the door, in my mind, I could only get as far as the door. I mean, you couldn't even imagine what it would be to go beyond the door, because there was no beyond the door. And that's the intensity with which, the way I'm trying to understand it now, I think what happens is, once you adopt this worldview, the cultic worldview, it's not so much that you lose free will, but your choices are confined and constrained within the context of this new worldview that you have adopted. And that worldview also becomes institutionalized and reified, so that in a sense you're functioning on rote. Just like everyday people get up, go to work, they don't really think about it. Well, every day we got up and we did what we did. We didn't really think about it.
What you were instructed to do.
We were instructed to do. And as it gets more and more reified and solidified, you don't believe you have other choices.
Around 1986 is when they disbanded and liquidated everything. And one of the party's former members, as we know, Larouche, ended up getting a degree in sociology and then speaking out against cults and everything and teaching people sort of what she learned from her experience and trying to help people along the way. Now, obviously, this is a really high level overview of this cult, but there were things that, that they were getting the lieutenants and people to do. For instance, Yanya was talking about how they would break up like marriages or relationships, try to stop marriages. As well, they were encouraging a lot of the women to not have children. Like they would get pregnant and then they would talk the women into getting rid of the baby and so forth. Like just ways, I guess, to kind of keep the woman single and keep up the feminist ideal and not get drugged into a housewife kind of situation. I guess like it's utter paranoia of it all. But in doing so, did a lot of damage to the people in this group. And a quote from Yanya in an article that she did an interview with, she says, "I really thought what we were doing was the right thing. But as I was more exposed, especially to her and her arbitrary decisions and her drunkenness, as well as waving weapons around, I thought this isn't good, but I couldn't figure out how to leave. By then, I had lost everybody on the outside. I had no friends, I had no money, I had nowhere to go, and I was brainwashed." And her story, eventually what ended up kind of breaking her was her mother had a brain tumor and they wouldn't allow her to see her mother, like, because she was working constantly for this cult. And then they wouldn't allow her to plan her mother's funeral, go get her mother's body, like do anything with it. She ended up doing it, I think, anyway. And then they ended up putting her on trial for putting her mother ahead of the revolution. And as Dixon ended up traveling, like I said, a lot of the members started talking to each other about the nightmare they were in. And then they held a vote to expel Dixon and dissolve the group. So Dixon traveling kind of helped save them all because they were all felt more comfortable to speak up and realized that they were in a very bad place. Then Yanya ended up finding a good therapist, worked through all of her issues and everything. And then now she helps other people understand cults, helps, teach about cult dynamics, when people leave a cult, things that they need, and so forth. And as always, I'll put references and everything down below. And I am very much paraphrasing this and very much simplifying this. And if I missed anything specific or anything like that in her story, if you want to put it in comments below, definitely do so. Her story is obviously bigger and more complex. So do feel free to go look into her some more.
There's not one answer to any of these questions. It's such a complex phenomenon.
I'm just going to briefly cover this cult of reason. It ran from 1793 to 1794. The sort of definition of this was a atheist state-sponsored religion that rejected Christianity, and it was built upon reason and truth. But then there was an offshoot of it, the cult of supreme being in 1794. And then there was the Decadery cult in 1798. So I think that they all kind of followed after each other. But let's take a look really at the cult of reason. That's the main one I want to look at. Okay, so it was actually, I didn't realize, but it actually was state-sponsored. It was a state-sponsored atheist religion, a replacement for Christianity. So they were trying to replace religion, so it is still religion in a sense because it's atheism, but it was state-sponsored. So you could say that there was politics involved in this. So they wanted to do this. They wanted to replace Christianity during the French Revolution. And I assume back then, I'm just going off knowledge I have. Back then, the churches were in charge of a lot of stuff and they held a lot of power over the people. So that's why there was offshoot religions that did happen, because the churches just finally, people got sick of it and they fought back. I don't know if this is this case here, but I know it kind of happened across Europe. So this actually became part of government policy in 1792. It was this sort of thought process process of anti-clericalism, which is like anti-church, right? So atheism. And this happened after the first French Republic was declared. So this was during a very chaotic time during the Revolution. So this de-Christianization of France was motivated by political and economic concerns. So how they put all this stuff into action was they converted the churches into temples of reason, and altars were also replaced, and they were called altars of philosophy. There was the Festival of Reason that was introduced as well. And they had like a goddess of reason too, which then, I mean, in my opinion, then you're starting to add a deity to that. The ultimate goal was to de-Christianize France and promote Enlightenment principles through different rituals that were civic related. Some people mention this one as an example for an atheist cult, but it was backed by politics and it was made because of political reasons. So I would still personally say that this is still a political cult. And apparently the cult, it encompassed different elements. It wasn't just like one thing. There was a bunch of different ideas and activities within it, which kind of happens when there isn't really any sort of structure, like a structured religion. It's kind of like open, right? Kind of like anarchy in a way. I'm just doing really high level of this. There's obviously a bunch of people in politics involved in all this. There's a lot more to all this, but I just kind of wanted to cover it very briefly. So what they're really pushing for was truth and logic and reason. And there are some different scholars saying that there was stuff written that this whole cult or whatever movement was like scandalous or, you know, depravity because they weren't taking, or they were trying to drop Christianity. And that tends to happen. However, other historians have said that that was sort of something that was said later to give it a bad name. They weren't like running around, you know, doing it in the middle of the street naked and stuff like a lot of things. They end up rewriting history when you look at a lot of this stuff. And the Cult of Reason, as well as the offshoot one that happened, the Cult of Supreme Being, these were all banned officially by Napoleon in 1802. There's also the Decadry cult as well. So Napoleon kind of like made everyone go back to Christianity in 1802, and they banned it as a country. It's just really high level explanation of that for you guys. I just thought that that might be interesting because people say that this is the atheism version. It still sounds to me like it's very much political based though. So I don't know. You guys tell me what you think. Put a comment below. Now, if we're to apply some social media aspect to all this, if you're ever faced a secular cult, platforms, we all know they reward certainty, outrage, identity, enemy narratives, like this kind of stuff the algorithm loves to eat up. Nuance doesn't really trend well, especially it's the short form content that really gets us here. Like saying, I'm not sure doesn't go viral, but saying, hey, the enemy is lying to you and the enemy is the shadow government, that people click on that, right? And with these type of organizations, you don't just believe, you signal, defend, and prove loyalty on a public platform. And that's how these movements can become moral universes much faster through the short form content, especially. Algorithm amplifies it all. The crowd enforces loyalty, dissent gets punished socially, and the worldview becomes self-sealing in real time. And these social media platforms, they don't create the vulnerability, but they really industrialize it and make it grow. And that's the key thing to pull out of this. Okay, up next. So we zoomed out even further. What if it's not even one movement? What if it's like an ecosystem where multiple ideologies, creators, and communities cross-pollinate, recruit each other, and keep people in a loop of identity and certainty? That's where the next one goes. This is probably going to be the most controversial video in this cult series just because of the nature of things. But our next video is fascinating, is about the cultic milieu, which is sort of like a pick and choose what things you want. And there's like cults, QAnon, conspiracy theories, spiritual community, star seeds, like all of that stuff. After that, then I also have an interview with Susan Gerbic to do with Susan is in the Epstein files. The UFO community thinks she's a CIA asset, agent, whatever. And also Wikipedia is linked in there. It's 3 random things that interestingly join together, and it is a very fascinating story. So I'm going to be interviewing with her, and you can check out that story too. I do recommend that you go check out the rest of the videos. And if everything went well with my editing this week, hopefully everything releases at the same time. Sadly, this week we're only doing 1 video. Next week we'll have 2 because I'll have the cultic milieu and the interview with Susan. I'm just kind of getting back in the rhythm because I've been away, and I'm trying to get the algorithm to pick me back up again. Due to the nature of this video and it being related to politics, most often secular cults related to politics, once in a while it's just related to non-religious groups. And there is a message I want to talk about regarding the state of the world right now. With everything happening in the world right now, I can't stand seeing people be hurt. People are being killed. There's tons of crazy stuff going on right now, whether it's through ICE, anything to do with wars going on, even just like people being persecuted for being different. It's insane that people are being hurt because of this stuff. I care deeply about people in this sense, and I think many people do. I don't think anyone wants to see people actually getting hurt and killed like that. It's crazy. So that's why I'm going to be dedicating space in my videos for fundraisers. Like I said, I'm going to link them below. There are a couple that I want to actually link right now. There's one that helps women and LGBTQ plus folks access life-saving medical care across state lines. And especially with some of the bills being passed in some states right now, it's crazy that women like can't get proper care for if they're pregnant. Like, it is insane. And then another fundraiser I want to link as well supports legal aid for families separated by ICE. And as well, there's a whole group. It's called Creators Against ICE, and they're actually linking a lot of the fundraisers to these like law organizations. It essentially helps lawyers get paid so that they can help get people out of these detention centers, people that aren't criminals and don't belong in there. There's Canadians that are being held there too. I'm in Canada, if you guys didn't realize. We have a travel advisory for the US, be careful traveling to the US. This is crazy. We've never had that before. It is insane what's happening. So those are the two that I feel really strongly about. However, now with all the war stuff going on, I'm going to try to research and figure out what would be like a good one to link to that funds would actually go to help the people on the ground. It's so iffy sending money to those to war-torn areas because a lot of times people just end up pocketing it. Like, it's very corrupt. So we'll see what I can do. And before you get upset and write comments, for any of you that are angry, just remember, this isn't about politics. Yes, this video is about political cults, but this fundraising stuff, it's about humanity. We've seen so much death and destruction. Whether you join a protest or help someone directly or donate or share a link to a fundraiser, every little bit matters to help people that are in trouble. Most of us can agree that we don't want to see this. We don't want to see people dying, whether it's due to immigration policies, reproductive injustice, war, or anything else. If someone enjoys that type of suffering, that's a sickness. Most of us are better than that. I just really want to focus on the people that are in trouble, real trouble, bad trouble right now. Those who are stuck in detention centers, those that are separated from families, those that are, being killed for standing up for their rights. I mean, people are being shot in the streets too. It's crazy. I'll probably rotate the fundraisers too, so just check in the descriptions, check to see what's linked on each video. And in the end, let's stand for life, because most of us believe in a world where no one should be suffering like this. Right now, it's not necessarily about picking a side. Let's just choose life, and let's just choose respecting fellow human beings. End this video with thank you to all the members and patron supporters. Your support means all the world to me. It really does help quite a lot, and I do really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.